Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters. I'm your host Mitch, glad to have you here. If this is your first time watching the show, let me give you a quick rundown on what we're all about. Here on the Commander's Quarters, we build fun and inexpensive focused commander decks. A focused commander deck is more tuned than a casual deck, but not quite to the level of a competitive or optimized deck. Today's episode, though, is going to be a special one where we feature a super budget deck. So what do I mean by a super budget deck? Well, typically we build our decks with a $25 budget that's $25 for 100 cards. However, with this deck, we're going to challenge ourselves even further by limiting our budget to only $15. But before we get started, why don't you go click that subscribe button to make sure that you stay up to date on the latest Commander's Quarters deck techs. Today's super budget deck tech is going to be built around Yargle, Glutton of Urborg. Yargle is a 9/3 frog spirit that costs 4 and a black, and that's it. He has absolutely no abilities and is just a 9/3 vanilla creature. Now, even though he doesn't have any abilities, 9 power for 5 mana is a very good rate. And since he has no abilities, we're going to build around that power with a Voltron strategy. So our strategy for this deck is going to be to get Yargle out as quickly as we can, just keep him alive, and suit him up to make him huge. How do we win with this deck? Well, we want to kill our opponents quickly with either commander damage or with infect. We only have to buff Yargle a little bit in order to get him into that 2-hit kill range with commander damage. And then with infect, he's only 1 point of damage away, but we have to give him infect first. As with all Commander's Quarters decks, I'm going to break this deck down into 10 different tactics that show you how the deck works and how you're going to win with it. Let's go into tactic number 1, the mana pond. So we want to get Yargle out as quickly as we can, and with this deck we can get him out as soon as turn 2. Prismatic Lens and Mind Stone both cost 2 and tap for a colorless. We can even pay 1 to tap and sacrifice Mind Stone to draw a card. And then we've got Star Compass and Charcoal Diamond, both of which enter the battlefield tapped and tap for black. Then we're running Unstable Obelisk, which costs 3 and can tap for a colorless, and we can also pay 7 and tap it to sacrifice it and destroy target permanent. Since black doesn't have too many ways to deal with enchantments or artifacts, this card can come in huge for us. Then we've got Worn Power Stone, which costs 3, comes into play tapped, and adds 2 colorless. Next up we've got some mana dorks that are going to help out as well. Plague Mirror costs 2, taps for a colorless, but it also has infect. We are running a lot of ways to pump our creatures in this deck, and usually we're going to kill with Yargle, but Plague Mirror can be a good secondary win condition for us. Then there's Basalt Roll and Soldavi Adnate, both of which can tap and sacrifice themselves to add 2 black mana to our mana pool. If we can get these guys out on turn 2 and we hit all of our land drops, Yargle is coming out on turn 3. Dark Ritual costs 1, but will add 3 black mana to our mana pool. With the right opening hand that includes Dark Ritual, we can actually get Yargle out on turn 2. Finally, there's Bubbling Muck, which is going to make all swamps tap for 2 mana. The longer the game goes on, the more effective this card gets for us. Alright, now that we've talked about how to get Yargle out quickly, let's talk about how to protect him. It's time to go into tactic number 2, don't CROAK. It's very important in a Voltron strategy to make sure that your commander stays alive. Throw Retainer is an aura that's going to give Yargle +1/+1, and we can sack it to regenerate him. Then there's Blessing of Leeches, which we can play at instant speed, and we can pay 0 to regenerate Yargle. We will lose 1 life at the beginning of our upkeep each turn, but that's worth it for this card. Soul Channeling is another aura, and it will let us pay 2 to regenerate Yargle. Again, paying a little life is no big deal, we just really need to make sure that Yargle stays on the board. Skeletal Grimace is an aura that's going to give Yargle +1/+1, and we can pay a black to regenerate him. Then there's Ring of Zathrid, which is an equipment that will allow us to pay 2 to regenerate Yargle. At the beginning of our upkeep, it's also going to let us put a +1/+1 counter on Yargle since he's a black creature. Then there's Medicine Bag, which is an artifact that will let us pay 1 to tap and choose and discard a card to regenerate Yargle. Voyager Staff is an artifact that we can pay 2 and sacrifice it to exile Yargle and bring him back at the end of the turn. Then there's Demonic Vigor, which is going to give Yargle +1/+1, and when he dies, he's going to come back to our hand. And No Rest for the Wicked is an enchantment that we can sacrifice to return to our hand all creature cards that were put into the graveyard from play this turn, so that means if Yargle dies, we can bring him back to our hand. Now, while it's better for us to keep Yargle on the battlefield, if he's going to die, it's better for us to either flicker him or to bring him back to our hand so that we're not paying that extra commander tax. Rush of Vitality, though, is a card that will keep him on the battlefield. It's going to give him +1/+1 and indestructible and lifelink until the end of the turn. Finally, we're running Swiftfoot Boots, which is a great card in this deck. Not only is Swiftfoot Boots going to give him hexproof, but it will also give him haste, so if he does die and we recast him, he can swing that same turn. Speaking of haste enablers, let's go into tactic number 3, Frog Legs. Again, haste is a great thing to have in this deck, because if Yargle does die, we do want to swing right away when he comes back into play. Fleet Feather Sandals is going to give Yargle flying in addition to haste. This card does double duty for this deck, giving Yargle not only haste, but also a form of evasion. Then there's Chariot of Victory, which is going to give Yargle First Strike, Trample, and haste. And finally, we've got Sword of Vengeance, which is going to give Yargle +2/+0, First Strike, Vigilance, Trample, and haste. With all of those abilities, it's one of our best pieces of equipment in the deck. But how do we get to these cards, and how do we dig for those other cards in the deck that we need? Let's go on to tactic number 4, Life in the Swamp. Black is very good at drawing cards, but it also pays a price to do so. Sign in Blood and Knight's Whisper are both going to draw us 2 cards and lose us 2 life. Read the Bones is first going to let us scry 2, and then we can draw those 2 cards and lose 2 life. Succumb to Temptation is going to let us draw 2 cards and lose 2 life at instant speed. And then Dark Bargain is also at instant speed, and it's going to let us look at the top 3 cards of our library, and we get to put 2 of them into our hand and the other one into the graveyard, and it's going to deal 2 damage to us. Siphon Mine will usually draw us 3 cards. It's going to have each other player discard a card, and we get to draw a card for each card discarded this way. Ancient Craving and Ambition's Cost will also draw us 3 cards, but they're going to make us lose 3 life. And finally, there's Necrologia, which we can only cast during our end step, and we're going to have to pay X life in order to cast it, but we get to draw X cards. This is a really good way for us to fill our hand back up when we need to. Alright, so what cards will we be digging for? Well, let's go for some evasion cards first. It's time to go into tactic number 5, Fly for Supper. Vorak Battlehorns is going to give Yargle Trample, and it can't be blocked by more than 1 creature. Now, while this isn't technically evasion, if we have Trample on Yargle, it's going to help us get some damage through. Then we're running Nowak Hoversail and Cobbled Wings, both of which are going to give Yargle flying when they're equipped. Cheap evasion is huge for this deck because, again, we need to get Yargle through as quickly as we can. Let's go through some more cheap evasion in tactic number 6, One Ugly Amphibian. Fear and Dragon Shadow will both give Yargle Fear, which means that he can't be blocked except by black and artifact creatures. On top of that, Dragon Shadow is going to give him a nice little +1/+0. Then there's Gruesome Deformity, which is going to give Yargle Intimidate, which is pretty much the exact same thing as Fear for this deck. Predator's Gambit's going to give Yargle +2/+1, and it's going to give him Intimidate as long as we don't have any other creatures. When equipped, Executioner's Hood is going to give Yargle Intimidate. On top of giving Yargle Intimidate, Grisly Transformation is also going to draw us a card when it enters the battlefield. And then there's Vow of Malice, which we can use either offensively or defensively. If we want to give Yargle +2/+2 and Intimidate, we can put it on him. But if we want to prevent one of our opponents from attacking us with a specific creature, we can put it on their creature, and then it can't attack us or a planeswalker we control. Fear and Intimidate are both great forms of evasion and work most of the time, but if one of our opponents has either a black creature or an artifact creature, it's not going to help us. So let's go through some more surefire ways to make sure we get Yargle through. Let's go on to tactic number 7, Slimy and Slippery. Prowler's Helm is going to give Yargle unblockable except by walls. The vast majority of commander decks don't run any walls, so he's pretty much just going to be unblockable. Then there's Dothy Embrace, which is an enchantment, and we can pay black to give Yargle Shadow until the end of the turn. Shadow is a pretty old mechanic that's going to make it so that Yargle can't be blocked except by other creatures with Shadow. And again, the vast majority of decks don't run any creatures with Shadow, so he's pretty much just going to be unblockable. Hot Soup is going to make Yargle unblockable, but if any damage is dealt to him, he's destroyed. Then there's Whisper Silk Cloak, which is also going to make Yargle unblockable, but it's also going to give him Shroud. So Shroud is great for protecting Yargle, but it also can be a hindrance if we want to attach other things to Yargle. So we need to be careful when we're doing this. Finally, there's Key to the City, which we can tap to discard a card and make Yargle unblockable until the end of the turn. And when it becomes untapped, we can pay 2 to draw a card, which is going to replace that card that we lost. Again, with this deck, we want to kill our opponents as quickly as we can. Evasion comes in huge for this, but it's also good to have other cards that help us speed up that kill clock. Let's go through some of those in tactic number 8, Totally Worth It. First up, there's Inquisitor's Flail, which is going to double Yargle's combat damage. The downside to this one, though, is that if he's dealt damage, it's going to deal double damage to Yargle too. Then there's Fire Shrieker, which is just going to straight up give Yargle double strike. Next up is Blackblade Reforged, which is going to give Yargle +1/+1 for each land that we control. And since he's legendary, it's only going to cost us 3 to equip to him. When Serratus Scythe comes into play, we're going to search our library for a swamp and exile it. And then once we equip this to Yargle, he's going to get +1/+1 for each swamp that we control. Lash Writhe is also going to give Yargle +1/+1 for each swamp we control, and we can either equip it by paying black and 2 life, or just 4 life. Now, we do have a lot of cards that make us pay life in this deck. Let's talk about getting some of that life back. It's time to go into tactic number 9, Live a Hoppy Life. Eternal Thirst is going to give Yargle lifelink, and whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, we're going to put a +1/+1 counter on him. Loxodon and Warhammer is an equipment that's going to give him +3/+0, trample, and lifelink. This card can come in huge for the deck, not only helping us get damage through, but also gaining us back a ton of life. As long as our only creature is Yargle, Homicidal Seclusion will give him +3/+1 and lifelink. The same rule applies to Deadly Wanderings, but instead it's going to give him +2/+0, Death Touch, and lifelink. Other than Yargle, we're only running 3 creatures in the deck, and 2 of them can sacrifice themselves. The only one that can't is Plague Mirror, but swinging at someone with Plague Mirror is pretty scary for them usually because they don't want to get that infect damage. So usually they'll block, or we can just use him to block something to get him off the battlefield if we need to. Speaking of infect, let's go on to tactic number 10, Pond Scum. While commander damage can be pretty quick at 21 damage, infect is even quicker at only 10 damage needed. That's why our golden pig of the deck is Tainted Strike. Tainted Strike is an instant that costs black and can give Yargle +1/+0 and infect until the end of the turn. This card is insane in this deck and is pretty much just a death sentence for any opponent. Since Yargle starts off at 9 power, Tainted Strike puts him up to that 10 infect damage that we need to kill our opponents. Remember how I told you it's possible to get Yargle out on turn 2 with this deck? Well, if we also have Tainted Strike in our hand, we can kill someone as early as turn 3. Now it's more likely that we get Yargle on either turn 3 or turn 4, but still that's a turn 4 or 5 infect kill. And since this card is at instant speed, this kill can come out of absolutely nowhere. Early on in the game, even if we don't have any evasion, other people might not have creatures out. Or even if they do have a creature out, it might be one that they don't want to lose, and so they're willing to take those 9 points of commander damage. But instead of 9 points of commander damage, we just kill them on the spot with infect. We're also running 2 other cards that give Yargle infect, but not at instant speed. Pyresis is an aura that's just going to straight up give Yargle infect. And then Grafted Exoskeleton is an equipment that's going to give Yargle +2/+2 and infect. There is a downside though. If this equipment ever gets unattached from Yargle, we have to sacrifice him. This deck is really fun and can kill your opponents out of nowhere. Many of your opponents might not see Yargle as a threat at first, but they will shortly. Alright, now that we've gone through the cards that help you win with the deck, let's go through the cards that help make it happen. It's time to go onto the mana base. We're going to be running 37 lands in this deck, including Rogue's Passage. Rogue's Passage can either tap for a colorless, or we can pay 4 and tap it to give Yargle unblockable until the end of the turn. This is just another great source of evasion for Yargle. Then we've got Cabal Stronghold, which we can either tap for a colorless, or pay 3 and tap it to add black for each swamp that we control. The later the game goes on, the more mana this is going to generate for us. And finally, we're just going to be running 35 basic swamps. Since we want to kill our opponents as quickly as possible, it's very important for us to have our lands come into play untapped. Alright, now that we've gone through every single card in the deck, let's do a quick price check. Our prices are calculated using TCG player optimization, optimizing with even heavily played and damage cards because those cards need a home too. The average Yargle EDH rec deck is going to set you back $113.46. Let's see how we compare to that. Our deck is going to be much more affordable at just $14.96. Again, our Commander's Quarters decks are built to be tuned and focused within our budget restrictions, but there are always ways that we can improve on them. Let's go on to our reasonable upgrades to see what some of those ways just might be. First we have Jet Medallion, which comes in at $7.15. Jet Medallion is an artifact that costs 2 and says black spells that you cast cost 1 less to cast. This card can come in huge at speeding up our deck since every single one of our spells that isn't an artifact is black. Then there's Nightmare Lash, which comes in at $1.99. Nightmare Lash is an equipment that costs 4 and has equip creature you control gets +1/+1 for each swamp you control, and it's got an equip cost of 3 life. This card is very similar to Lash Wraith and would be a great addition to the deck. Next up is Basilisk Collar, which costs $4.52. It's an equipment that costs 1 and costs 2 to equip, and it's going to give the equipped creature Death Touch and Lifelink. Giving Yargle Death Touch can be great if we have First Strike on him, but the better part is that it gives him Lifelink. Next up we have Lightning Greaves, which comes in at $3.99. Lightning Greaves is an equipment that costs 2, and it's going to give the equipped creature Haste and Shroud. Since the equip cost is 0, as soon as Yargle comes into play, we can just attach it right to him. Next up is Darksteel Plate, which costs $4.54. Darksteel Plate is an indestructible equipment that costs 3, and it's going to give whatever creature it equips indestructible as well. Again, one of the main focuses of this deck is to keep Yargle on the battlefield, and Darksteel Plate is a great way to do that. Another great way to do that is Hammer of Nazan, which costs $9.19. Hammer of Nazan is an equipment that costs 4, and whenever it or another equipment enters the battlefield under our control, we can attach that equipment to target creature we control. It's also going to give the equipped creature +2/+0 and indestructible. This card is insane in this deck. Not only is it going to give Yargle indestructible, but it's also going to give him +2/+0, putting him at 11 power. On top of that, it's also going to let us equip other things for free, which is huge. And with that, our show is coming to a close, but I really want to hear what you guys think about this deck, so why don't you comment below and let me know what you think. Also, make sure you follow us on both Twitter and Facebook so you can get some early hints on who the next commander just might be. And links to our Twitter and Facebook can be found in the description below. Also in the description below is a link to our Patreon page, and I just want to give a quick thank you to the patrons who have subscribed so far. There are many benefits to being a patron, including being able to vote on commanders for deck techs like this one. There's even a new general level tier where you get your own personalized deck tech episode dedicated to you. If you enjoyed this deck tech, please like it, subscribe to the channel, and check out some of our other deck techs. And with that, I'm out of here. Thanks again, and have a good one.